Hello, Vamadeva.
Hello.
I'm very interested in hearing about your early life and any guiding forces that led you inward, whether it was people in your life, whether it was certain events. What started your journey inward?
It's hard to tell. There was always this two sides, I would say, of the story, to the story. On one hand, I consider myself to be quite an introverted child. I was able to spend prolonged periods of time by myself, according to my mother. I grew up without siblings, so that, of course, was also partially due to that. At the same time, and as a contrast to that, I've always enjoyed a good kind of company, and I was like involved in all kids' activities wherever I happened to be. So perhaps there is something in terms of where I chose to put my attention from quite an early on in my life. I've had this knack of drawing constantly, and of course, that was encouraged. And even in the kindergarten, before going to the primary school, I remember winning competitions, and they would give me a box of this, brand new pencils. I really felt like a treasure. So it kind of, in a way, there was this natural unfoldment. I've always loved drawing. I've always liked doing things with my hands, that creating something. So this sort of identity, or rather a creative direction, quite early on in my life, required that going inward. It was almost a part and parcel of, when you draw, when you paint, you're by yourself. So that I think was always there. Whether this was because that was somehow directed by the kind of impulses that would later on lead me to a conscious understanding of what it means, because I had no concept of all that what is today for quite a large, if not the majority of young people, is there. It's out there. Like, for instance, to give an example, I've never heard the word meditation until I was late in my teens. The first time I've heard the word actual meditation in Russian, it really struck me as something very familiar, but very, very novel. It was fascinating. And I was, in fact, not in a conversation. I've overheard a bunch of other guys who were a few years older. They were all like in kind of associated with the Krishna movement. And they were speaking about that. And I've overheard that conversation. I was thinking, what's that? Maybe I did hear that word. Maybe I even came across that. I must have, because I read some of the existentialists from a very early age. Like, I remember I had these books given to me by the brother of my mentor when I was barely in my 14th and 15th year. Kierkegaard, Schopenhauer. Later on, in my teens, Nietzsche, of course, particularly Thus Spoke Zarathustra, was circulating around, not even as a published, but more like printed copies. So I'm not sure if I'm answering this really when that impulse going inward, because there was no concept of what it even means to go inward, if you see what I mean.
Right.
So I was already spending a lot of time in solitude, which, being a painter, was required. You are left there one-on-one with what you do. And I guess maybe these are the earliest, I would say, encounters of that dynamic.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so there is this solitude and this intimacy in your everyday life. It's interesting because I find some people, at least most people I encounter who enter this work or meditation in general, it often has to do with their current state of affairs, or they're suffering, or they want to just improve the way they feel. And it sounds like maybe for you that maybe wasn't the case. It was more just something that was some intimate relationship between what you were doing, maybe that maybe got you on that path.
Well, yes and no. I think it will be also fair to say that there was a fair amount of suffering, fair amount of pain that I had to encounter later on in life, still in my young years. But the move, the distinctive, let's say, step, wasn't even made, I should say, by myself. Because as I have spoken on the occasion, undergoing through this very, very difficult time when I was already living in London as a young painter. And it was a particularly difficult phase. And it coincided with a slip disc or some sort, like down there in my third vertebra.
Physical injury.
Physical injury. And I was very athletic, I was very sporty, I was exercising. To me came as a complete surprise. It's like suddenly I cannot really put my body together. And like literally wearing socks in the morning was going through the agonizing pain. And it reached a point where I like literally, I didn't know how it's all going to pan out, because I go to the chiropractor, I get fixed, but a few days after, it all gets back into this complete and utter state of me not being able to function.
Mm.
So, and that's when it happened at night, while sleeping in a dream. I had this, suddenly my body literally was thrusted forward in bed, like I sat.
Wow.
And some kind of force through me. And it felt as if there was some kind of whisper, some kind of message. It wasn't message in words, it was just some kind of straight to the top of my head. And message directly translated, like you got to meditate.
Wow.
You ought to meditate, you ought to just okay. That's how I interpreted that. I don't know whatever that whisper was, but the interpretation was, that's what it is.
Mm.
And it was accompanied by the sound, the primordial sound as well. So that was even more striking, because prior to that, there was not that much, I would say, interest on my part into all things Indian. So, and then my body fell back and I fell asleep. I woke up in the morning, and the first thing I did, I crawled out of bed. I put the cushion against the wall because I couldn't sit upright with a lower back pain. And I started to meditate there and then. It was like literally up and awakening from the sleep. I just thought that's what I ought to do.
And you hadn't meditated before this?
No.
At all? Ever?
No.
Wow.
No, there was no meditation in my life. This is before I turned 30. It was in my late 20s. And quite interestingly, this trauma at the lower back just went off.
Wow.
Maybe just 1 week time. It was a pure miracle of healing.
And this is just, I'm assuming this is before you had real pranic activity in your body, just from sitting in that state of solitude, something shifted?
Okay, so as a child, I had some involuntary movements. I also spoke about it in some of my earlier, let's say, interviews and when I shared about this. And my mother used to even sit on my feet, like on my shins, for comforting me from that, what sometimes is spoken in terms of like leg syndrome, restless leg syndrome, I think.
Yep.
But it wasn't that, because when I read about it later on, it had this very distinctive feeling of the movement. The movement was coming from the large toe of my left foot through the knee, shooting into the coccyx area. See, so this, I later learned that it is all was associated with some pranic activity that Kundalini is known for. But then it went quiet. Then it kind of like, maybe my attention, like I entered in my blooming teens, arts, physical activity, relationships, love, all took priority and kind of that fell on the background. So I don't know if it was there or not. But when I started to meditate, immediately my head started to move.
Wow.
Like within the first 2-3 sittings, there was this unstoppable movement of the head sideways like this Chinese dolls, like these Chinese Buddhas. And you know, the body and the kind of the head that is moving free, you push the head and it's just like moves like that. Literally, that's how it was. Like my head just goes.
Wow.
And I would be okay, let's stop. So I would stop easily as soon as I release the attention, and it will go back again like this. For years, this went on. For 2 years. For 2 years, it went like this, and then there was this one episode when I was meditating in the company of 2 other close associates of mine, like close friends of mine, all of them on the path, like serious. In fact, they were both ladies were yoga teachers, like really, into it, already working, teaching, So we had this meditation, and my body just went into a violent spin. So violent, like my body, the whole body just went rotating on that cushion and everything, and it freaked out, in fact, one of the ladies, and she, despite the fact that she kind of like, they studied this yoga philosophy, and she was just shaken. She was like literally pretended that she was cool, but you could feel that she was not. And I felt totally like, as if it was totally normal, although I'd never experienced anything like that. And I just felt, well, it happened by itself. I did not induce it. I'm not under any kind of consciousness-altering drugs. I'm actually very fit. I'm feeling very happy. I'm feeling blissful, in fact. So what's there to complain? So I hope I'm not running ahead of the conversation, but just to say that this was my entrance, let's say, into meditative practices consciously. And my mother by then was already a TM meditator. And not only that, TM-Sidhi meditator. She was already introduced to the advanced methods of meditation. She was writing to me a great deal about it. This was at the time when there were no mobile phones. We're talking about early 90s. Speaking to her was very expensive, so it will be that appointed day. I'll speak to her on a phone. Yes, everything is okay, and I could not even travel back to Uzbekistan. I was basically for 7 years without any real documents. So there was this prolonged period when I could not travel back to my home country, but Uzbekistan. And when I've related this to my mother, she said, that's all great. You now need to be introduced, or rather, she used the word, you need to be initiated properly. And though she talked to me about meditation before, it used to annoy the great deal out of me. I somehow, still were too young to consider that what my mother says somehow could have that much value. That's why in my early 20s. Well, no, sorry, I was in my mid-20s by then. But at that time, I was like, yes, I hear you. I'll do that as soon as I get my passport. And truly enough, as soon as I got my British passport, 1996, I flew back to Uzbekistan and I took the initiation. And I was initiating already with the TM mantra and continued for 5 years. So already my life had this structure. I was pretty much involved, busy with my art career. And I had this practice morning, evening. It was just beautiful. Very simple, very structured. Meditate, come out, recharge, full of energy.
This is the TM,
The TM,
Sidhi,
yeah.
or the,
Not
the
TM,
basic?
this is just the TM.
Got it.
Not the TM-Sidhi yet. And so that was for nearly 5 years.
Wow. More of a maintenance practice.
Yeah, we could say that
In
it was
retrospect.
like, yes, in retrospect, definitely it was more like really recharging the batteries. And then going out, exhausting it all, going back, recharging it again. And so it had this sweetness, of course. And of course, I don't want to also downplay that it was just that. It was also coincided with a great interest towards Vedic culture. I started reading ferociously. I was like, really wanted to know more about it. But not anything about Tantra, more like, these expositions, the Bhagavad Gita, Sri Aurobindo.
And during this time, you would say you hadn't had this full-blown awakening, but you're still having sort of pranic movements in the body. Did you sense that there was something bigger, something more to this, or did you think that was going to be your practice for the rest of your life?
I have to be honest. Aside from my head continuously moving like that, I thought that that's it. I felt and thought that as long as I continue meditating like this, then literally one day I would just get up from the meditation cushion with some kind of altered awareness. Like I would just get up and that's it. And it felt probable.
Well, it's interesting because I think in the States especially, like that's people's idea of meditation. It's just like, sitting peacefully in a garden, 20 minutes, just kind of this maintenance approach, and maybe you feel a little better. But I think, that was my impression of this work before I joined this work. So yeah, it's just interesting how, I'm sure you'll get into how things eventually progressed from that point. So you said you were doing this for 5 years. So what led you to make that next leap, and how did that play out?
So I have to kind of maybe lay the cards on the table a little bit here. Although outwardly there was nothing that could really indicate that there was any need for change. In fact, I was really coming close to the fulfillment of my dreams as far as the career is concerned. All these years of uncertainty of it being a young artist in a different culture, like young artist making it in London or whatever city that, like Berlin, New York, like you name it. All that was behind. I had patrons, I had clients, I had everything happening. There was just really, there was this sense of recognition. I had important critics noticing my work, speaking about it highly. I knew some of them very closely, in fact. So as far as that, what it kind of like, spoken at that level, everything was speak and span. Like,
Life was good.
Yeah, life was good, exactly. So just, renting a studio just off Abbey Road, Clifton Hill. It's just beautiful residential area, you know, like a proper artist studio. I was in a relationship. It wasn't an easy one, but there were also a circle of friends, and it was this richness of life, I could say, richness of experiences, traveling, everything. There's nothing on, nothing I really could be the cause for complaint. But something happened, and again, could be spoken of in terms of that projection of the heart. And like, I fell in love with this girl, and basically was rejected. And to put it in a very, very simple terms. So what that prompted, because I was already 35-year-old, I was in my mid-30s. And it's not like I would just kind of waste my time, you know, like just sleep over it. It's just, it was this tremendous convergence of energy. I remember walking in Hyde Park, and this decision, like, not decision, is this feeling that is breaking my heart, swelling my heart. And since it cannot find its outlet, towards a person. It kind of falls back on me now, and I could feel this almost like, I don't know, that kind of very good brandy, warm feeling in the chest, spreading all over, you know. And it's just suddenly I could feel how everything is at that very moment begins to get somehow transformed in a sense of becoming much sharper. People, you know, these tourists, cyclists, rollerbladers, you know, kids, all these like trees becomes really filled with this presence. And I'm walking through that Hyde Park. I'm walking up to North London through Edgware Road, because I needed like this also to put it into that physical action. I walk, and it's quite a chunk of walk, you know. It's where I lived at the time in Maidavale. So I walk there, and this feeling in my heart is just like all this way, and it's the streets I walked many times, situations I've seen so many times, but it's as if lit by another light, another quality of experience. And it is at that time I have decided that I want to know exactly what this is really. You know, what is it happening this at the heart level? And there was this course forming in Uzbekistan, in my home country. There were kind of gaps at that time between these courses, so it's not like you can jump on any. So I thought, I'm definitely going to go to this advanced meditators course, TM-Sidhi. And this whole testing in terms of patience begins, because the course is being postponed every month. It's midsummer, August postponed, into September postponed. You know, and it's like, so it didn't take place until well into November. So I finally flew to Uzbekistan, and by that time, as I'm on a plane, I knew that my life will never be the same. Like, I just had this very strong, very acute feeling that I'm flying out from one time-space zone into another. How it will pan itself out, what will be the transformative force? I had no idea, because I was thinking that I will take this course as just an upgrade of the meditation, and that's where it all happened.
Amazing. So there was just this intrinsic motivation to go deeper. Yeah, so talk to me about what unfolded after that. I've heard you touch on this in the past, but I'd love to, hear you revisit that and the Big Bang, so to speak.
Well, the again the kind of the container itself. Those who know this, they will relate very well. It's just 2 weeks theoretical study, not just theoretical, also learning of the sutras, and then 2 weeks on the mats where the program is actually being run. Like, so, and it's distinctive as well. So, and each day, even as we are on this, sitting on the chairs in this rented school, there's no TM center, it's just TM center was migrating from place to place. So it was a school rented for that during the hours when the kids are not at school. So we all sitting at these chairs and kind of like, and I had to sit at the back because I just started to feel these bars at the base of my spine. I just started to feel this like I'm about to explode. I didn't know where and how and why. It's just this charge is rising, building. So by the time that part of the course is completed and we go into the part on the mats, the very first day where we test the so-called flying sutras, because the TM-Sidhi is based on this hopping on the mattresses, and we all have these thick mattresses for that, really padded. The first day we sit down there and it's just exploded, completely and utterly exploded. It's just like I was transported somewhere. I didn't know what is happening, and there's no force that could stop it, and there was no energy in me that could go with this force. So it actually felt somatically very unpleasant. I felt nauseous. I felt dizzy is not the word. It's past that.
Was there fear there too?
Huh?
Was there any fear?
At that point, it was like the physicality, the unpleasantness of the physicality was taking over. So it was just like, how can I go with that? And so hopefully it will subside. But it's just getting more and more and more intensified until it's reached a point when it became very intense, and I felt like I'm going to pass out, or I'm going to but I cannot stop. The body is in a spin. Body is spinning, moving. There's this velocity, this sense as if you're driving in a vehicle which goes at a tremendous speed, and it's kind of like also not in a straight road, but like. And at that point, kind of this intimate moment, by then I already begin to develop quite an intimate connection to Maharishi as a figure, because I would hear his lectures, of course, and see his tapes, and even him speaking in these televised transmissions.
So you already had a bit of a connection to Maharishi before.
Yeah, but not connection that we could speak of. Like it was just connection, and like just this sense of gratitude, this kind of like, not more than that. And at this very moment, suddenly, when I felt I cannot take this anymore, this is really the end. And there was something there immediately. Well, if this is the end, then I don't know where to go, because I cannot stop this. It's beyond me. This power is. I'm in a foray of the forces that are beyond my capability. It's not like I'm going to stop and walk out of the room. I was in that. And at that very moment, when I felt like the worst, I had literally this internal vision, because we were all with eyes closed. internal vision of Maharishi's face somewhere around my forehead. And his face was there very clearly, and then just moved forward and kissed me right here.
Oh my gosh.
And literally it felt like, and at that very moment, all the sense of gravity is gone.
Wow.
And I felt a huge ball of iridescent light descending down. I could just feel it descending down, and my body hopped into the air, into that ball, and I was absorbed into that light, into that iridescent white light, where all perceptions ended.
Wow.
Like there was literally, I felt like I was consumed by that light. So, and it was accompanied by extraordinary sensation of what I did not have any analogy to compare. It felt ecstatic. It felt extreme and extremely pleasant in every way. So all these sensations that I was experiencing before, there was none of that.
Wow.
And above all else, it felt also like as if I'm flying somewhere, flying, like as if I'm kind of. So then it subsides, and I find myself lying down on my back and like totally transported, resting. And it was related to me and by the administrators of the course. And it's a couple, Indian couple. We were in two groups, men in one room and ladies, like in terms of the proportion, they were a larger group. They were in the sports room. And us were like 12 guys, I think, 12, 13 guys. And we had this big Indian lady, and she apparently stood preventing me from hitting the radiators. Because I was hopping all over the place. I was just bouncing like a ball. And she was just standing there. And maybe when I was like, she just pushed me back. So this is, let's say, was the first visceral, direct experience of that. And when the administrators gathered us all at the end of the day, and we were all together now, men, women in one group, and the Indian couple, they spoke English through the translators there, and I was one of the very few who spoke to them directly in English. So the guy says, so do you want to share what you experienced? And I don't know how I can explain this, so I kind of crawled to him and tried to say something in English. I'm trying to say something in English, and he just goes, Ananda, Ananda, Ananda.
Wow.
I remember that, like, he just like said it 3 times, confirming.
Yeah, I mean, I got to imagine even for that container, this is a pretty abnormal experience.
I don't know, because yes, I was the first to bounce. I was the first to took off, that was true. And so he said, for the benefit of group, please speak. And I started to speak. And the 3 ladies who were right in front of me, they all burst into like tears, and like they all were crying, like richly, tears pouring. And all I said is just, in a very, very brief terms, I try to convey what I experienced. And all 3 of them took off the next day.
Wow. So you were
I don't know. There was something that obviously, something has to enter the room. It has to find its way. So, and then of course, the whole 2 weeks, I was just like every day as if going, through something that every day will bring something. And going back home, I was staying at home at my mother's flat, where I grew up. And I want to relate this experience, I think, because it's something very, very important and precious, and it gave me for many, many years incentive to speak about it from first hand. And like literally, it's a very, very, few buildings in the old town if I were to, let's say, watch it on a movie, it's comparable to the ghetto. It's just like these apartment blocks. And what struck me the most is how small everything was. How small. Everything was so small. Like the stairs, the hallway, the toilets, the bathrooms. Everything is just small, tiny. And at the time when, by the time I came back, it all was like really messy, and it's just like rubbles and graffiti and this and that. And I'm coming back from one of these evenings, and like already late at night, I'm walking back, and I'm completely blissed out. And there's guys standing in there's guys, some of whom I remember I grew up together. They all heavily into now drugs, alcohol. They're like, they all look like 10, 20 years older than me. It's like easily.
Wow.
And it's just, oh my God, like, because I didn't go back there to hang out with my friends. I came to the program, so I haven't seen anyone.
Yeah.
Suddenly there's this, and there was none of that kind of in me that, although I very clearly see that this completely like, if they were not the guys I grew up, I would have called them junkies, right? But I don't feel that. I'm in that blissed out state. Everything is just, has that tingling, like internal light that leads everything somehow and makes everything feels different. So I go and I just like very friendly greet everyone, and any other time I would have passed by, I said, waved the hand and moved away. It's like, and I come and I stand there and they just talk, and they all are full of compliments and they're kind of like full of respect, like, and because they know like I live abroad, I live in London, I just kind of like, turn into a local legend and and I just stand there and I just suddenly caught myself, my God, it's like something is different here. My perception is completely different. To me, it was very, I even wrote the entries into the diary that how everything really lit by the state we are in. And everything can be completely transformed by virtue of how it is transformed within ourselves. And it was a direct experience of that. There was none of that. There were some of guys were like smelling of alcohol, like some of them smelling of just because they don't change their garments, Guys just, but it was just, just something happening. And in that blissed out state, it did not matter. So I then go home and everything continues to be like that. Everything is just dinging, jumping, kind of vibrating, that fruit, that whatever. So,
wow.
So this is really was just the beginning. All this was just unfolding at the beginning. I had to change my flights because I could not fly in that state. I had to really postpone my stay for another 2 weeks because I thought, well, how can I, just let me ground myself.
It's pretty earth-shattering.
Yeah. And I thought, I will just ground myself and, and I trying to imagine, project how would it be when I would come back, and it will be complete blank. It's like I try to focus. It's just a blank. My thought doesn't go there. It just falls back here in that state of just that trepidation, felicity, that. So I gave myself a bit more time, but then I had to go back, right? Because I felt like now my life is in London, not here. I need to go back. So I fly back, and I'm going to go how this whole thing, the journey in the plane, how I had to to hold the Kriyas and then like go to the hallway, walk, and there's a plane full of Sikhs because it's Amritsar, Tashkent, London. I was very favored by that kind of route. Or sometimes London, Tashkent, Delhi. So it 60% of passengers on the plane, and I'm sitting sandwiched by two Sikhs, you know, and the guys are just like I'm dozing, drowsing. So at some point I'm like, okay, I saw it, and my body went into like, just like this vibrations and shake. So I just shook, and the guy who was dozing, he was just, just look, yeah, like really, and go back his fast. Okay, he's like as if he totally understood what's going on. It's just like, you know, nodded, you know. And then I came back to London, and that's when it really happened. So like everything that was prior to that was the, I would say, prelude, a real prelude to what, you know, what happened in a very, very short period of time, all in January. And it was literally a confirmation of that, what I felt on the plane when I was flying to Uzbekistan, that my life will never be the same. And I didn't know in what way it will never be the same. And that's what happened. Because everything I knew about myself, all was just wiped out completely in very, very rapid, dramatic, spectacular, forceful way. But by that time, there was something that almost had like, you know, when the fire gets bigger, bring it on. Let us find whatever we can throw into it. There was this almost like, I was just all one ball of curiosity, all one ball of what is it? So I did not care anymore because I could not refer to that state, whatever that is, state of consciousness, a state of mind, where I can, let's say, well, let's pause for a moment and decide. Let's see what's the options. Do I want to go there? You see? Like the reference point wiped out, and all I feel is this very, very strong, energetic, constant energetic, like I'm in some kind of a frequency that I cannot extinguish, I cannot subdue. So the only way was to continue meditating. And in fact, desire to meditate was like being in a natural state. Meditating, of course, not meditating anymore. Meditation finished. It all finished. It was like, it was a continuous, non-stop movements. Continuous, non-stop movements.
Yeah, so you leave this structured environment, this program that has its, you know, way of teaching. I guess when you get back home, I guess, what is that transition like? At what point do you kind of like veer away from what you had already learned, right, the methodology, to, you know, actually like being your own guide and going inward? Like, how did that sort of unfold for you?
That's a good question, because I still, at that time, strongly felt and thought that I ought to structure my practice all around the program itself, TM-Sidhi. And I stuck to that. So I thought that that's what I ought to do. This is what I thought, that this is really part and parcel of the whole thing. But I couldn't even meditate with the TMers. I have tried. I went to the local TM center, and I had some, unfortunately, ambivalent experiences, because even some of them tried to restrain me. Like there was kind of a spurt, like these encounters that I had to apologize everyone, and some guys were, don't worry about it, this is like, I totally understand. Others were like, some maybe saying, well, maybe he's doing something wrong. Another guy said, well, Maharishi never spoke about Kundalini. So I kind of left there without really having that, let's say, immediate. I don't want to call anyone responsible. I'm very happy the way things unfolded. Now, in retrospect, and even back then in retrospect, but of course it felt like, well, I'm quite frankly on my own. Because if in the TM Center, I cannot do the programs together, and there are these programs. In the evening, guys come, ladies in that room, guys in that room. It's all neatly appointed, special mattresses, this, that, this ambience, the center, pictures of the saints, So I decided I'll continue this on my own. And it is when this very strong sense of intuition begin to present itself. And what's interesting is that just as there was this outlined, let's say, structure of the TM course, TM-Sidhi program, I would lean on it. But I would have this intuitive understanding that whatever the force, the prana, is now doing to the body ought to be respected and followed with, without trying to kind of ascertain myself on top of that. And in a very, very quick time, there was this, the yogic process unleashed. So that all these, let's say, more chaotic, with violent moves, they started to feel as highly orchestrated. As if there is this, literally, a very learned moves. I was like sometimes astonished, like, wow, this is like, where's that coming from? These are the moves I've seen classical Indian dancers do. Or these are the moves I've seen, or this feels like asana, but I've never seen it, and I've studied yoga, I did yoga courses. I've never seen that before, but it feels like asana. It feels like body locked itself into it, and something going on there. Of course, the bandhas, the mudras, and the change in breath, in breathing.
And for those maybe not as familiar with this work, this is all happening completely spontaneously in this state of absorption.
And voluntarily, totally in a state of...
So you weren't doing anything per se.
No, of course not.
Just happened.
No. And it's also, it all happens soon as I would sit down. So there was no like warming up kind of thing. I'm going already, and I go to the place which is assigned for my practice, and I sit down on the mat, and it's as if I take off from where I left it, literally. So at times I wondered, am I doing the sadhana in a sense of that outlined program, or it now has its own kind of language? But being kind of already then very strongly on the heart level, having this connection to Maharishi, I just felt, well, that's what I ought to do. And that connection grew. It became a true experience of devotion.
And you're still having visions of Maharishi occasionally popping up, guiding you, or was it more kind of this inner...
At that time, maybe it will be worthy of mentioning that since my kind of unsuccessful attempt at finding spiritual community to do this work in the local TM Center, I was blessed to know the family who was very close to Maharishi, Susan and Amar Hamza, the Lebanese family who lived in London at the time. In fact, they were very close to a lot of some illustrious people, in the movement. They, for example, were very close to Deepak Chopra in his early years. Deepak Chopra would always stay in their house when he was still an working as, when he was part of the TM movement. And I knew Susan more than her husband, whom I also met, of course, but she would hold these gatherings, these meditations. And because of my private connections, through the art connections, through some private connections, I was introduced into this circle, so I kind of had this privilege to be invited there. So I called Susan and I said, I want to share something just from my heart. And she understood immediately and she said, meet me there, not even at home, just meet me. And we met at the cafe. I went there and I just told her what I went through, just literally. And Susan goes, you must write letter to Maharishi, because what you describe here is the experience of three higher states of consciousness in sequence. The cosmic God and unity, of which Maharishi spoke a lot. And Maharishi would definitely would love to hear that. And we're speaking about now early 2000. So it's like Maharishi completely retreated. He's only appears twice a year through televised broadcasts by satellite on his birthday and on the Guru Purnima in the summer. So, of course, it's not the case of, it's just literally, you write this letter, and Susan knew Maharishi's secretary, Girish, and she said, I will pass this letter, and so it will definitely reach Maharishi, because you can imagine millions of followers and hundreds of facilitators, hundreds of TM teachers, many, many countries. So it's not the case of like we can just, So I took that as an encouragement and I wrote that letter, and gave it to Susan, and Susan said, it's now, in safe hands. So, and I was waited a little bit. I was waiting whether this, and then at around maybe a month and a half time, I suddenly had this strong connection now to Maharishi's teacher, Sri Gurudev, who Maharishi basically venerated and did all this work in his name, Swami Brahmananda Saraswati, Jagat Guru Shankaracharya of Jyotirmath of Himalayas, who was highly revered Indian sage, who took that appointment after many, many years of local community trying to persuade him, which he declined repeatedly until he took that post, until he left this world. So, and of course, and I had a picture of both Maharishi, beautifully framed, beautiful images, and Gurudev, yes, I had that, his images, but there was this, suddenly I had this visceral connection. Before that, the connection was only, let's say, aesthetic, I would even say, because the picture is stunning. And on all there were very few pictures, but any pictures that were circulating in the movements, they had this iconic feel, this Indian sages, in sepia and black and white, right? They something is like, right, for someone it's like Santa Claus, or, but for those who have insight into the culture, they have their own flavor, they have their own rasa. So, but there was never connection. And then suddenly in my meditation, I have this as if Gurudev sits in front of me. And I'm like, this is ridiculous. Not this is ridiculous, but this is like impossible. And of course it is impossible, so don't even try to think this is possible. This quick, very quick, like flicker of thought, like, right? This, with my eyes closed, I feel a figure, like. So I thought I will open my eyes now, just like, when you feel someone behind you. And you can ignore it, but the feeling of open, to turn around is stronger sometimes. Just, okay, all right. So I'm going to do that, but I can't open my eyes. I can't open my eyes. I try to open my eyes, I can't open them. But the presence is there. you see? And I immediately realized this is not to mess around. I completely surrendered, and then this phase heralded the unfoldment of the refinement of perception, where within quite a short period of time, all these templates, all these subtle tattvas corresponding to physical experiences were tapped into. Subtle sense of smell, subtle sense of smell, subtle sense of touch, subtle sense of sight, all began to be experienced vividly. Vividly.
Was in meditation or just
in meditation? In meditation. This refinement of perception. Almost like I would somehow spontaneously place my attention on a flower, and I immediately will inhale its fragrance. Immediately. And I even, at some point, I was frequenting Regent's Park, which is known for its collection of roses. There's some very rare roses growing in that garden. Regent's Park, there's a circular part, which, like, these roses are extraordinary. They all have names, like. I always loved roses. I grew up in roses. I painted them. In Uzbekistan, there are these roses that are they're like this, It's not cultivated roses that stay like this, slightly open, sold in Holland, produced in Holland. No, it's just like rose opens up and place attention, and scent of that particular rose is right as if the rose is here. The sense of touch, that sparsha. That divine sense of touch which would send the shivers of bliss. And of course, by then, the fullness of the experience of lights and sound. So the nad, I was established in nada, fully. So the progressively refine the sounds, starting from, I could have mentioned that already in the already all the crickets were, whilst I was still in Uzbekistan. It was like, in fact, very loud, piercing sounds of crickets that, like, sometimes it felt like a symphony of these crickets, and then it progresses, that, until the experience of which I spoke in the interview for the Conscious TV, in the early interviews that elsewhere, which no longer exist. The most memorable, let's say, was the sound accompanied by opening of the heart, that anahata chakra, which was experienced classically as I read about it. But I read about it afterwards. This what was extraordinary. That sound of the flute, suddenly at night, and I spoke about it too. Yeah, we spoke about it in private, amongst the associates and students, but I did mention that in some of these, let's say, interviews, but the suddenly sound comes and floods everything. And I don't know where the sound is even coming from, and it's like that sound of the flute. It has distinctive melody of the flute. And although in a way I know exactly what's happening, and yet there's this a strange behavior begins. I get up and I start to walk around as if I want to find the source of that sound. It's not that I'm walking around trying to find it, but as if, you see what I mean? It's this kind of like a state of bewilderment. I go outdoors, it's night, I go, it's like, I meander under the trees, go to this hotel, right?
Where's the sound coming from? Is it like, how is it?
At that time, it was coming from everywhere. Everything was filled with that sound.
Are you like literally hearing the sound, or is it more of something that just like
it's like a resonance, you see? The best example I could give is when you're standing in close proximity when a very large bell is struck. Because then the sound goes through your body, through your cells. Your cellular structure vibrates with that sound. So it's not just the sound that you hear at a distance. Have you experienced that? Close to the very large bell somewhere, right? So that humming resonance. But in this case, it's the sound of the flute. And of course, it's accompanied by this opening of the heart. And the phase of this outpouring begins. So this is, the sequence is a little bit, the experiences with that, let's say, what I read and interpreted as Maharishi's letter reaching Maharishi, coincides, somehow facilitates this phase in sadhana, and in non-local manner. So it's not that, because some people may snoot at it skeptically, and I'm not at all presume that somehow Maharishi facilitates something here. But what it is, it's obviously happens in consciousness. It's some kind of like something, this confirmation at that very subtle level. And that confirmation requires this, what would act at that time, at that moment, as that, let's say, connection. You see? So that also, later I've learned how auspicious it is to see the master of the master. Literally, in India, there's a lot of things about it. There's obviously a veneration of one's master. As granted, it's known. But there is something else. In one sadhana, introduction into the master of the master in itself is considered to be a highly auspicious event. So this is how I've interpreted that. And that's what gave great impetus to continue, and it manifested itself in this refinement of the phase, as the refinement of perception, that celestial perception which took sadhana to the next level. All my kriyas stopped. All movement stopped. I could not get enough of stillness, because it is in stillness that this was experienced. Sometimes I would feel my body become a sphinx. Sometimes even I want to move, it would not move. And then from there, it unfolded. So from there, I would say some very important realizations begin to happen. Very important realizations, a more stabilized experience of unity, whereas before it was experienced, but it was not, I wasn't established in that. So it's like it was touched, experienced, but it's not there. So I mean, again, this because it's good, this is, we're talking about not weeks or months. This is took quite some time. So when I say compact phase of time, that major unfoldment, that complete and utter swipe took place in just a matter of 3 days. When it's completely like, because after that heart opening, it progressed and took me. And this is where that merging with light, where there was no identity. I didn't know who I was. I didn't know what all this, like there was this, everything was just filled with a iridescent light. Everything was filled with bliss of a very new quality, of a very different quality. And the intensity of that experience then, of course, had to be integrated and stabilized. So it wasn't easy.
That was my next question. It's hearing you talk, it sounds like it was all sunshine and rainbows, but we all know, you've mentioned this before, awakening is a major shock to the system and the body, and I'm sure there were times where it wasn't easy. And maybe I think it would be helpful to, talk about some of those times and what got you through those. And yeah.
Well, to begin with, all the prana was moving now through the internal pathways. So I would, in the earlier, let's say, first few weeks, maybe couple of months, más o menos, something like that, I would come out of meditation as if I did a full workout, even at the level of cardiovascular. Like I would come out as if I came out of the full-blown workout. My body got round, firmer, like this firmness, this lean, see, like this muscles everywhere. Like I really feel great. So of course I thought, wow, this is like, you don't need to exercise. You go and you now combine meditation with the with the workout, because that's what it was. All these movements, right? And so you know that from your personal experience, because that's what you're going through, and the intensity of these physical movements. And then that subsides, and then in another phase of which I just spoke, how that swipe through Sushumna, and I'm in 3 days I'm lost. I don't know what I am, who I am, where I am. Of course I know where I am, and it's not like I'm exaggerating it for the purpose of relating to how it felt, because it felt like I don't know who I am. I don't know. Yes, I see this body, I can see myself in the mirror, but there's this undeniable what the whole thing went through, this event. So the phase of integration began. I can't eat. I have to sniff, feel, go on the level of intuition and instincts. What do I want to eat? Any food tastes strange, no. So I go for literally period of time. We're not talking about period of time, not 2, 3, 4, 5 days. I'm talking about maybe 2 months at least on milk only. Milk, ghee.
Told me this in Germany. Yeah.
Yes. Turmeric. And that's what I would do. It feels nourishing. I found a place, great butter, to make the ghee, good wholesome milk. And I was never into cow's milk anyway, never. But it was like body was craving just that food. Hot milk, a whole bowl, a drink, and that's it.
Did this coincide with that phase of pranayama?
Yes, there was a lot of pranayama, a lot of breathing, kumbhakas, breathing, all this. Kapalabhati, Bhastrika, stop breathing. Suspension. In that suspension.
Kind of makes sense, right?
Yeah.
Like you wouldn't want a lot of stuff in your body if you're locked like that.
Totally. It's like solids felt repulsive somehow, even already in the mouth. Already it felt like that whole... So I would be just, and I knew I need to nourish myself. I knew I would kind of I need something that will keep that ojas replenished. So then what else I should probably add is all physical activity became very, very challenging, demanding, even walking up the hill, carrying, let's say, I never drove in London myself, because it's just that I never felt, because everything felt very, very convenient, like I cycled in London a lot. So just everything is just, I would walk up the hill, that Primrose Hill is just and just had to take a pose. Had to take it felt really, really as if it was difficult to move the limbs, the body. You see? So there would be occasional, some kind of illness would be thrown on the surface, out of the blue. Out of the blue, something would be thrown. the most dramatic was just in the spring, when it's already weather turning into an ice, I'm suddenly getting pneumonia. Just like a fully blown pneumonia. With, like, what was the, where it came from, how fast, just like that. And then it went. So it went like, I had to, like, my friends insisted for me to go to the hospital, and it was, obviously all these antibiotics were prescribed, and I reluctantly took that. And so this wasn't all as, as you have said, it's not all roses, and it's not all like it cannot be seen through the tinted glasses. But amidst of all that, there was something, again, that resonance, that reverberation, this something that I was like on a journey, you could say. I was on a trip. I was on some kind of something that I did not have in me to stop. And it was also accompanied by this extraordinary sense of adventure as well. Adventure. I wanted to know where and how it unfolds, you see? So
Yeah, I found in recent years, my own practice, it almost feels like it's a video game. It's like you're leveling up, like, and you can't wait to
yeah,
see what unfolds.
Yeah, exactly. It's like you want to go back and what's next? How is it going to unfold this time? And of course, when more stable, let's say, phases, it was also coincided with having to physically move, leave my studio. This, let's say, renting that place, decisions on a practical level, like about the livelihood. All this was there, of course. It's not that I was exempt from all these questions. I was completely having to make these decisions in that state. So these decisions were coming from, not from a place of, they were coming from like, I try to sense into this, what would be the right thing to do? And it just begins to organize itself. It just begins to organize itself. See? So soon as that kind of more stable phase came, ferocious appetite for reading, for getting to know what is this. And this is where also what very precious is that encounter with Tantric philosophy proper, with Kashmir Shaivism, with all these trips to the Watkins in London, that bookstore, and having these encounters with the right book at the right time, and sometimes down to the ridiculous, like deciding which book, and the book just chooses you more than you choose the book. And it's exactly what you need. It's just like completely so.
So did you feel internally that the teaching that you were ultimately going to give back with this work, I mean, you didn't have a living teacher yourself, but you're learning all this, you're digesting all this information that's just presenting itself to you at the right times. Was there that inkling that this was going to be the next phase of your life, giving back to the...
No. At that time, not yet. These temptations were coming from the outside. They were like tests, I call them. As I began to be approached, it was never the other way around. I never had, this is like, literally I began to be approached, and it would not necessary to go into these details, but though it's quite interesting and intricate how it all works, how this, whoever happens to be in that, in the presence of that, what I was going through, must have felt very infectious, very contagious, right? So I could just relate to that. and how the propensity would be then to put me in a position, sometimes in a most direct way, like, be my guru kind of thing, not even using other words. And it's not some kind of hippies who do nothing. This was coming from people who were professionals and busy and successful and what have you. But I felt that it was very, very, I felt like this is some kind of provocation, something testing me here. So I repeatedly would avoid this possibility. What instead I took quite seriously is correspondence with fellow seekers. And I've just happened to meet quite a few of them back in Uzbekistan. I've made new friends in other parts of the world. I've met some people on the path, and obviously in London. And this is all prior to the real internet proper kind of phase still. I'm engaged in this very rich email, mostly based correspondence, where I was just able to respond to these dilemmas, questions, and support, like what I felt like, that's up to me to share, and it didn't feel like I'm in a role. I'm simply sharing from the place where it felt that would somehow support what they're going through. From, let's say, fellow TM-Sidhi losing her son, like there was this episode where, or someone going through a very, very difficult time in a relationship, or in a sadhana, see? So, and then the phase of these forums and blogs began, and that kind of transited into that format where I just held one and only forum, one and only blog in my entire life. And suddenly this became more organized, so it didn't even have to be purely private. It could just be in that forum. And it resulted in hundreds of letters, hundreds of this, which I think was very, very instrumental in a sense to being able to relate. But the decision, actual decision to take this for what it is, came when Maharishi left his body. Because then it was experienced as the very, very kind of unusual form of that mixture of devotion, of suddenly this is okay. It's like, though I've never met Maharishi, but it felt literally, and I was not single in that. I've had that in many, many people who had that strong connection. It's when you lose a parent. This accompanied by a sense of growing up, suddenly. Suddenly it's like something psychologically was experienced at that level where, well, that's your calling, you see? And I remember I gave it like, I want to wait for sign. No, 3. And all this was given. All this was given.
So you almost had no choice after that.
Yeah, exactly. It was like very, very clear. I had this lucrative job in Uzbekistan. We were living in this diplomatic compound. I was already with Amrita. We had our first born child together, Ramana, still a year-old baby. And I remember I just sat Amrita like that in front of me. This was before Amrita was renamed into her spiritual name. And I said, I want you to hear me. And I just tried to relate to her in that sense that this is what I want to do now. This is what I have to do. And there's nothing else, there's absolutely nothing else that I want to be doing. It's just nothing else really holds my interest, attention. And it became very clear, so that's really all I could say.
Well, we're very thankful. If I may, kind of bounced around a little bit. I just wanted to go back to your sadhana. I think a lot of us, we're on this path, and not many people that I'm aware of reach those later stages of refinement. And I guess I'm just curious. You talk a lot, and Kashmir Shaivism talks a lot about that subject-object relationship, and ultimately, it kind of culminates in this union. And I'm curious, like what that was like for you, and did it signify the end of your sadhana? Like, how did you know you were, I don't know if done is the right word, but at some point you have this culmination of your spiritual practice, and it's kind of on to the next thing. Like, what was that? Was it an event? Was it felt over a period of time? Like, I'm just kind of curious.
I don't connect this, I don't correlate this with the end of sadhana. I will let's see if I can restore this clearly. That refinement took place already quite early on. That refinement quite early on in my sadhana, because the time itself was so compressed, compacted. In terms of, let's say, spectacular, let's say, events for the spiritual autobiography, for the movie, the fireworks, the intensity, all took place within the first 2 years. All. Everything after that was from more refined to more refined to more refined to more subtle. So it's nothing really to write home about. But what I already began to notice back then, how this connection also brought reminders of what was experienced when, as a young artist, you spend a long time in front of a model and still life, landscape, whatever happens to be an object of your interest that you try to depict, draw, paint. There is a distinctive moment which is very sweet. It's so fleeting. And when that happens, it's the greatest satisfaction, but there's no words, because I was outside of spiritual language. See? So it was just that, in a way, undiluted, unintellectualized, direct cognition. When subject and object, due to that intimacy, gets so neatly intimate. I don't want to say this was unity, but it felt like it. The same happened to me also in a very different, in maybe / more mysterious way, when I was student of St. Petersburg Academy of Fine Arts, doing my trips to the Hermitage Museum every morning hours between the 6 in the morning till the museum opening. Those few hours are given for the students to copy the great works of art, and you get the special passport, special kind of like permission, and person assigned to you. It's a whole thing. So I had this, I was working on 2 paintings at the very same time, a very difficult, very complex composition by Peter Paul Rubens, Ness and Deianira. It's like mind-bending. I don't know how I did that. It's like in this real kind of foreshortening figure of the centaurs, the Ness and Deianira. It's it's the story of the centaurs. Ness tries to steal Hercules' wife, and Hercules shoots him with his arrow. And it's the moment when she's kind of climbing on his back. He managed to seduce her to come run away with him as he was pierced. And then, startlingly different, there was this portrait of the Franciscan monk, just this small, very minimalist, this kind of like face of this monk with the hoodie, you know, also by Rubens. Very, very, very different, like very different kind of. And of course, in copying in a proper way, you have to, you spend hours to studying, looking, and then you begin to work. And it's like winter, early morning hours, you see? Nobody in that museum. It's just, this whole kind of thing is kind of. And I had these moments of, like, not the monk became alive and, you know, none of that. He was always alive. So vivid. But what I was doing and that object of my attention would become like that. And that would also be accompanied immediately by this sense of kind of like being high, really high. You know, like that. Maybe it was bliss and experience of bliss. I did not have a name for it. Maybe it was experienced by that sense of complete and utter flow state. So when this was experienced, now almost at will, consciously, whether I like somewhere in Primrose Hill, sitting in the tall grass, parts that is uncut, picnicking, whether I'm somewhere choosing fruits in a local shop, there's this intimacy began to be experienced very vividly, this intimacy. So that sense of witnessing began to recede, which I was abiding for a very, very long time.
It's like
many, many years, yeah.
It's like coming through a wall almost,
yeah.
Right?
The witness starts to disappear. See, the witness starts to disappear. So it's like, it's no longer witnessing. It's no longer, I'm experiencing this. I'm looking at this teapot and this cup. You see? I'm also witnessing, looking at this in terms of my eyes looking at it. I'm reflecting on this. This is what witnessing characterized. A constant commentary with a complete sense of detachment. And this starts to fizzle, recede. Instead, it's all just that, undiluted experience. Just experience, just it flows. And you cannot, I cannot say what is actually happening other than what is happening. So this already was viscerally reflected on, touched upon, see? In my diaries even, see, like this is, and when, what you're asking, right, this, like what you've asked, the end of sadhana was something else altogether. I continued sitting, even all throughout the years when I kind of like, in a way, consciously embraced the household alive. Already I was in a relationship, fully fledged relationship. The aforementioned, let's say, setting, we had to move back to Uzbekistan. I mean, I had to move back. Amrita followed me, you know, because my work demanded me being there. I was still continued with my sittings. See? I still continued with my sittings. All the way to that moment when I just got out of the mat and I realized that I'm sitting for nothing. I realized that I'm sitting in pure autopilot. See? Nothing is happening in the sitting that is not happening outside the sitting. I might as well lie down and have a nap and not pretend. I might as well sit down and have quietly tea. I might as well just that what was experienced prior to that, sitting, accompanied by something, either absorption, complete samadhi, then coming out of that samadhi, just you move slowly, everything is just kind of altered. Slowly you're getting even the use of the senses, or charged with energy movements, or coming out rejuvenated, recharged. See? So in other words, there was something the sitting would bring. And I realized it's just purely on autopilot. I'm sitting because I used to sit. Yeah, it was just became a habit. So I thought, well, I'm going to find out. I'm going to try. And I stopped sitting. I stopped sitting to see what and how that changes the state of consciousness, if it does. So we could say that this was, in a way, the end of sadhana. Because then everything that was experienced, let's say, and marked by these points, any whatever that could be called as marked territory was obliterated. See? Obliterated. And I did try to go back. Let's say I would sit. It's not that I can't sit. I sit with all of you when we in the programs. I can go and sit now, but it's not going to change a thing. It's not that it doesn't bring anything new, no old. It doesn't alter anything. If I'm tired, for example, and that is if the body is tired, then body would ask to take mercy, right? Come on, sit your butt down and relax, or just lie down, But then again, I would say yes, and immediately it vibrates. Immediately. If I lie down, the wave goes through the body. The wave goes through the body. Soon as I sit down, if I don't need to place my attention on anything, if I don't need to check anything, if I don't need to read anything, if I don't need to engage in anything that requires some form of attention, some form of flow of awareness towards, let's say, whatever that is in the moment, being an object, immediately I'm in that resonance. So that is, I feel that would be fair and honest and useful to mention.
It's the natural state of things too.
Yeah, it's a natural state, and it is not just it's not just some kind of receded into. It's visceral, it's even somatic. It is experienced as hum, as vibration, as frequency.
Awesome. I feel like that might be a good place to end.
Great.
The end of sadhana.
End of sadhana. And let's just have some more tea for that. That will keep you up.